Big tech companies, the training industry in software, they make billions of dollars every year convincing programmers all over the world that if you don't learn this technology, you will be left behind. You won't get a job. And that is the oldest marketing trick in the book. Whether you went to a university, a boot camp, or taught yourself, programming can be a lot of fun to learn. It lets you indulge your curiosity and gives you a big sense of accomplishment. But halfway through my career, I realized I was using learning as a form of procrastination. I wanted more money, more recognition, and more influence, but learning was the thing that was actually holding me back. After a while, I started to feel like I was drowning in learning just to keep up. In this episode, I'll show you how learning can actually become really destructive for you as a programmer. And in the second half, I'll give you some really practical strategies that you can use to know if learning is becoming a problem for you and it's actually the wrong time to do it. So how does learning technology become a problem? How can it actually destroy your career? Well, the first sign that this is a problem, and you may see this in other people or you've experienced this yourself, is it's a form of procrastination. You can basically try to learn a new technology when it's really something you're doing to escape from something else you're already responsible for. I was getting ready to launch a new course for my clients this year to help them with career direction. And instead of working on the course, I got pretty close to done with it. And I realized there was a problem with limiting API requests on my website, for example. And though I could have figured out how to do it with the current technology, I found a way to do it easier with another technology. And so I started to learn a whole nother programming language, a whole nother framework, and migrate a big portion of my website to that technology because I basically was deluding myself and I thought that I really needed to learn it. When really, if I would have just spent a little bit more time looking at the technology I was already using at that time, I could have just implemented it and used it then. So if you find yourself, and I'm going to talk about this quite a bit in the second half of this episode, using learning as an excuse when you know somewhere in the back of your head that it's really not time to learn, it can be a form of procrastination, and that can really damage your career because instead of just getting stuff done, you now force yourself to be under a lot of pressure to learn something new. The second way that learning something or being an addict, a learning addict in programming can destroy your career is when it becomes a sunk cost. And what I mean by this is you convince yourself that you need to learn some library, framework, technology, pattern because you might need to use it in the future, and then you never end up using it. And at that point, it is a sunk cost, meaning you wasted that entire effort that you spent learning it. So if you fall into learning addiction, that's one of the biggest, most damaging aspects of it is I think we convince ourselves we need to learn something. We spend an inordinate amount of time doing it. And then if we don't actually use it, we feel really depressed and frustrated and resentful really with ourselves for having spent all that time when we didn't really need to. And the third way that being addicted to learning can really destroy your career is because everything you learn as a programmer declines in value over time. You know this. The first programming language you learned, if you're 7, 10 plus years in your career, you probably know there are other languages, other frameworks, other libraries, other approaches that are becoming more popular in the industry. And so the value of what you learned goes down. You know, I was driving in a car once on the way to pick up my daughter from her friend's house, and I heard this photographer on the radio, and they were in their 60s or 70s and showing these photographs they'd taken of San Francisco at this big show, and they're being interviewed on the radio and they're asked all these questions. And I thought to myself, It's so frustrating being in technology that everything that we learn erodes in value. There's no way something I learned today, or I learned, let's say in my 20s, I can just master that skill and then be rewarded for it and recognized for it, 40, 50 years later. So if you learn something when you don't really need to, if it's due to kind of addiction, or you convincing yourself that you need to learn it and you don't actually end up using it, even if you do end up using it, rather, it's not going to be worth the same amount over time. People who learned, let's say, Visual Basic in the 90s, there's not a lot of people using Visual Basic. And I know there's a lot of debate and there's a lot of articles people read to try to figure out what's the most future-proof programming language. But at least in my experience, there's no way to know. The other way learning addiction can really destroy our career is we use it as a form of social avoidance. And what I mean by this is, once you go through, again, college or a boot camp, or you teach yourself how to learn your first few frameworks, programming languages, editors, different technologies, you kind of been through that process of learning a language, learning a framework, learning an approach, learning some architecture. And it's actually a lot easier to learn another language or another technology or another framework than to learn, let's say, how to persuade people better, or to learn how to communicate with non-technical people better. And so there's a lot of things that you need to learn if you're going to increase your market value and move ahead in your career that are totally different than technology. And if you refuse to learn those things, unfortunately, you kind of put a cap on your earning potential. There's only so much money you can make. So I find when I was addicted to learning and when I struggle with learning addiction, a lot of the times it's because it's actually giving me that sense of accomplishment and that feeling that I'm learning something, when really it's just me repeating the wheel again of learning another technology or another framework. And it's not actually increasing my value that much. It's just helping me keep up, when what I really need to learn is sometimes more awkward, more difficult, not technology related skills if I really want to make more money, or I want to have more of an impact at the companies I work for, or I want to get recognized or promoted. And the final way technology learning addiction can really affect your career is a way that it doesn't affect your career. Well, indirectly, at least, it affects your personal life. And that's when you have a work-life imbalance. If you don't have time on the job to learn something that you've convinced yourself is necessary as a programmer, you're going to have to learn it on your own time. And if you want to have, family, friends, people that you maintain good relationships with, you have to put time into those relationships. And if you're putting all your time into learning, you're weakening those relationships, and that can create, marriage problems, friendship problems. If you have hobbies, you can lose your skill and things like those. So, technology addiction can be destructive not only to your career, but in your personal life too. And hey, if the things I'm sharing with you, you can relate to this, you've struggled with this, if you'd like a little bit of accountability, if you'd like to have, other developers or other product managers or other people in the tech industry who are also kind of keeping each other in check about learning addiction and really a lot of the things I talk about on this channel, I actually have a Patreon with 2 memberships, and one of them gives you access to my private Discord server. And there's a bunch of people that really love the channel in there as well. So if you'd like some help before I get into the solutions here, click the link in the description and check out my Patreon. We've got a really great group in there that can really help you. So how do you know when learning new technology isn't really necessary? It's a trap. Well, the first way is when you delude yourself that the only way to accomplish something is with a new technology. This is kind of like what I was talking about earlier in the episode, but if you're using, let's say, C# or Ruby or Node.js, some platform or some language, and you're working on implementing some feature or, meeting some requirements on your software project, and suddenly you come into one where it's not immediately obvious to you how to do it in that current framework, but you, let's say, knew how to solve that problem in Ruby on Rails or, Rust or some other language, some other programming environment. You can kind of convince yourself, well, it's easier with that other technology, or I can't solve it in this. I have to use that other technology. And, the reality is you're just kind of tricking yourself. It's self-delusion. You've heard that term. You're deluding yourself when really the whole reason that you are wanting to use that other technology is just because you're addicted to learning. Another way to know that learning technology is actually an addiction or a trap for you is when you convince yourself that you have to learn to get a new job. Now, there are definitely periods of time, if you've been using the same language, the same framework, the same tech stack, whatever, for too long, you do need to learn new skills to possibly make more money in the marketplace. But I've seen a lot of people, and some of these are the people that I coach, where, they are tired of their current job and they want a new one, or they get laid off and they convince themselves that they need to learn a new technology to get a new job, when really what they need to learn is maybe they need to, do some hacker rank or some leet code, or they need to do some networking, some things that would actually be more effective for them in getting a new job, just getting hired. But they put those off and they focus instead on learning a new technology. So if that's you, you might want to consider, are there some areas of your career where you could focus your efforts that are actually going to get you quicker results to getting employed again? And then once you get settled, once you get a job, if you want to learn something, then you can check to see if it's something that's actually doable once you're paying the bills again. Another way to know that technical learning has become a trap for you, you're getting addicted to learning technology and you're about to fall into a trap, is when some influencer in the technology space has a lot of vanity metrics behind it. What I mean by that is you stumble on a YouTube video with like 2 million views and it's about some technology. And that big number, that's what a vanity metric is. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's important. It just means a lot of people clicked it. And I think if you're earlier in your career, or maybe you don't understand how social influence affects the masses, you may look at a number that's really big on a Medium article or a LinkedIn post or a YouTube video or an Instagram post, and you are convinced that so many people clicked this or so many people viewed this, that that's equivalent to the value to your career of investing in learning it. And that's not necessarily true. I think the older you get, the more you realize that the masses are actually not a good group of people to base your decisions on. Most people popularly fall for things easily, or they support things that are popular. They're not necessarily correct for you. So if you stumble on some big influencer, even if it's my YouTube video and it has a lot of views and it has a lot of it's some concept you're not familiar with, you don't necessarily have to learn it. You should step back and think for yourself. Do I really have a situation in my career right now where this really makes sense? It's worth me investing in it, not just for some hope for the future, but I need to do it immediately. The fourth way to know that learning some new technology is probably a trap for you is when the tech industry itself has convinced you through fear of missing out that you have to do it or you'll fall behind. Look, big tech companies, the training industry in software, they make billions of dollars every year convincing programmers all over the world that if you don't learn this technology, you will be left behind. You won't get a job. And that is the oldest marketing trick in the book, FOMO, fear of missing out. So like if you are reading up some article or you read some, like Gartner is a big company that does like comparisons of which companies are most popular and which ones should you follow. You need to be very careful. I think you need to be very careful when you follow any big tech company like, Google, Facebook, any of the big companies, following their advice of where you should place effort in your career, because remember, they stand to make a lot of money. Now, that doesn't mean, hear me out here. That doesn't mean that there couldn't be a benefit to it, but they also are motivated by profit like any other company. I'm not saying profit is evil. I'm a capitalist like everybody else, but just be realistic that There's people that work for these companies. They're marketing people. They're paid to tap into your emotions as a programmer where you have a lot of fear. And so if you're feeling a lot of fear, if you're reading an article, if you're looking into a technology and you start to hear statements like, if programmers that don't learn this in the next 2 years will have no job, or like, the value of programmers who don't learn this new technology is estimated to decline by 80% in 2 years. Those are all unproven, situations that haven't even happened yet, and they can easily force you into starting to learn something that's a complete waste of your time. And the fifth way that learning a new technology can become an addiction and it's a trap and you're about to fall into it is kind of like what I talked about in the first point of traps you can fall into. It's specifically when another technology looks easier to do something than your current one. This is a problem with mastery in general. I've seen a lot of developers over my career who use one language for, let's say, 2 to 3 years, and then they switch to another language for 2 to 3 years, and another language for 2 to 3 years, or, frameworks, cloud environments, whatever it is. But they never really master a given language. And so they're constantly getting jobs, and they may get paid a lot coming in the door, but they're there for like 6 months to 8 months and they get laid off because really they can't do the work. They haven't really mastered the language or the framework or the technology. And I think one of the ways that happens is, any programming language, any technology you learn, it usually has a lot of different features and you don't need all those features. So you tend to only use what you need to learn. And that's good. You don't want to, every time you use a particular library, memorize every single aspect of that technology. But as I've gotten older, I try to be very patient if I've been assigned a requirement or something like that, and I don't really know, like, if it's supported in my language or I don't know how to do it in my framework I'm using, I will then scan as much as I can of the documentation. I won't just do a Stack Overflow search or Google search and try to see, is there some aspect of this technology that was actually designed specifically to solve this problem? I'm telling you, like 7 to 8 times out of 10, I find that's the case. I find there's some pattern, some special edge case in the technology I'm already using that makes it possible to meet the requirements. But if I knew how to do it in another language or another technology or using another library before, my temptation is just to jump back to using that. And then a lot of times what I would do is, well, if it's easier there, why don't we just convert all the code or this whole section of the code to this new, language or this technology? And then I'm learning again. I'm learning how to convert everything. I'm learning how to map it to the technology that I knew better. And I'm not really actually contributing to the project, getting stuff done, and increasing my value. So you're facing some serious temptations yourself to learn new technology today when you don't really need to? Are you ready to stop putting off the things that you probably know in your heart are really the things that you need to invest in to move ahead in your career? Let me know about it in the comments. Until next time, thanks.